Center Street in Decorah. Today, July 6, 1990, we will be discussing Antoinette's memories, especially as they relate to Washington Prairie. Before we go any further, as a sort of introduction for the record, will you give me some general background on your family, when and where you were born?
Okay, well, both my parents on both sides were born in Washington Prairie, and and I lived part of my first couple of years of my life on the same place as Andrew Baki lives at the present time, which was my great-grandparent Baki's home. Then I moved on to my grandfather Solon's home, which is the home situated back of Washington Prairie Church at the present time. And then we built our home, and I was 4 years old when we moved into our home, which also was directly east of Washington Prairie Church. Now, did you want me to tell my parents, my great-parents' songs? So we have the pictures out. This was my grandparent Solon, and Henrietta Solon was a Hague. Then this was my grandmother Solon, and she was Henrietta Hague.
Now that would be Dave.
Yes, that's Dave's aunt. Wait a minute. No. Great aunt.
That would be his grandfather's sister,
Right.
sister. Okay.
That would be his. Now this is a picture of my mother and her sister and brother. Now this is her sister Emma's confirmation picture. And this is my mother's confirmation picture.
Now you mentioned the dresses that your mother made, and they were quite fancy
These dresses were very fancy, and my mother made these dresses. And Uncle Anton's picture is the same as on all three of them, because he died at a very young age when he was in college at Ames as a crew in 1917. Now that's the Solons. My father was Eric Baki, and this is their wedding picture, which was October 3rd, 1916. And my parents were married on October 3rd because both of their mothers' birthdays were October 3rd. Now this is a picture of my grandmother and grandfather Baki, but my grandfather Baki died at the age of 41 or 42. And then this is his family, this picture was taken after his death, because Ole was born 3 to 6 months after his father died. Now I guess that about the pictures and about the family. Now I do recall a couple of little episodes living at my grandfather Solon's place. My sister and I going in kitty cars and so forth around the dining room table. And then I do remember getting into my dad's roll top desk. He wasn't very happy about that because he had all his records from Nordman's Creamery in it. Then I do recall a few episodes in our moving up to our new home. I remember our hired man who was Slim Codling, and he worked for Reverend Thorne too. And I can remember sitting on his lap. But up until this time, I spoke Norwegian, which I don't recall. But, of course, I had to speak English because of hired help. And then, of course, my starting school, I had to speak English. And I had a few problems, they told me, with my S's. And I remember when I took speech in high school, which I had Helen Adams Bodensteiner, who is still living here in Decorah, and she would correct me on my S's all the time. And they said it was due to my speaking Norwegian, they were sure. But up today, I do not speak much Norwegian, that's for sure. Um, of course, I was born at Decorah Hospital, the old hospital here in Decorah, but my sister was born at home. We helped a great deal on the farm because we had no brothers. So at the age of 7, 8, we milked cows and of course took our dog with us and always went for the cows and took them back out to pasture. Now attending school, we attended school at Red Oak, and Red Oak School was also attended by my mother and by my grandfather Solon. The same stone building still stands, and the Umdals live in it at the present time. Now, there was an old creamery across from this school down in the field, and this property was owned by my grandfather Solon. And at recess time, we used to play in that old creamery, and I remember the floors, which were sagging, but I don't recall that our parents were very excited about it. Then another thing we played in was that Methodist church that now it's a historical spot. In going to school one year, most of the time we walked, but one year we decided to take horses, and we had 2 horses that we could use as teams, or we could also use them in riding, but they were both blind. They were red, and they were beautiful horses, and so the first day our father helped us hitch it up to the single buggy, and we went on to school and got along fairly well, but coming home the horse wanted to back up all the time, so one of us would have to, my sister and I would have to run ahead and open the gate so that we could get through. Then by the time we got down to my grandfather's, we had to call Dad and ask him if he would come down and help us get our horse and cart home. And so he came down, and I remember he was flipping the horse, and they kept backing and backing, and down below Grandpa's house they had a stone pile, and they were sitting on top of that stone pile. And I remember we were quite frightened, but he did get the horse down. So the next day we tried the other horse, and we got along fine going to school again, but on the way home the horse wanted to sit in the buggy for us. So that was kind of dangerous. So we arrived home both safe. Then the next day, my dad said, well, as long as Doll was the name of the horse, as long as she has a coat and everything, maybe you could take that one to school. So we did, and we must have taken that horse for a couple of months. And then we'd always let it graze down in Grandpa Solon's woods during school time. And of course, when we were at Red Oak, we had to carry our water from either Moe's or Hobie's or from the old Solon place, which I think Johnson's live there now, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, we did have a furnace in our school. And my first teachers were Clara Baki and Ruth Hansen. She was Ruth Baki at that time, and they were my dad's sisters. Then we had Signe Ruin. She was Signe Hoyne, who is still living and lives down on Fifth Avenue here in Decorah. And we had a Swartz, Viola Swartz, and Rosa Swartz, and Ethel Yarwood. And I think that was we had a different teacher almost every year. And of course, our classes were all run in the same building, first grade through 8th. And we were called up to the head of the room, each class, as our lessons were recited. Apparently, this did not affect us as far as I can remember. Apparently, we must have just disregarded it when we were studying. And of course, we had outside toilets, and they were a bit cold in the wintertime. And think of the teachers at that time. They had to be there early and start the furnace or stove, whichever they had. Our school happened to have a furnace. And of course, many of the people end of the cemetery. And that was fired up with wood stove, and of course we met with Reverend Corn every Saturday then for a year. And at the time we were confirmed, of course, the one Sunday we had the catechism and explanation, and we were asked all the questions and answered them in the middle of the church. Then the following Sunday we were confirmed. And I do remember confirmation because my first name was Henrietta, and my grandmother Solon's name was Henrietta, and so Reverend Corn confirmed me Solon, and I still remember that. Of course, we never thought much about it, I don't think. But my grandmother Solon's name was Henrietta, too. And of course, I can remember most of my classmates from a confirmation. There were about 12 of us. There are a few of us still living. Palma Asham is still in the area. Dorothy Hovey is still living here in town. And Gladys Chivry, which is Norman Chivry's sister. And then there is a Nelson, Mildred, her name was Mildred Nelson, but she was Mildred Chivry Nelson's sister-in-law. And we had a Karlsruhe, and they ran the creamery in Norden. Now we had two boys in our class. One was Edward Ripstad, and I don't recall the name of the other one, but they are both dead. Now I don't know what else you want me to go into at this time. Now I was thinking of, in our lifetime, all the things that have taken place, actually. We are talking about lights. Of course, we had lamplight, and today they have electricity. We had coolers for our cream, of course, was either hoisting a pail down into a cistern, or we did have ice, some ice. And of course, today we have all kinds of refrigeration. And I remember our first radio, we sat with earphones, and we had these down at my grandfather's, and my aunt. My aunt was in her 40s before she was married, so they were kind of, my sister and I were their pets, I think, because we were the only grandchildren. But we thought this radio was great. We sit there with these earphones, and of course today we have TV. So that's come a long way. And of course we had outside toilets, and today many have several bathrooms. And we started out with the wood ranges, wood stoves, and of course now we're clear up to the microwave. Of course gas heat, electric heat, and so forth. And we started out with horses in the fields, and I remember cultivating corn, and my sister and I would race across the fields sometimes, and Dad had come out and checked to see if we had misplaced a few hills. Of course, at that time, you plowed both east and west and north and south, and they don't do that anymore, I understand. Then also, when we were on the farm, we also used to trap gophers and woodchucks, and then we got 10 cents for the bounties at the courthouse. And I believe that has gone on until just recent years. We used to get 10 cents for the gophers and 15 cents for the woodchucks for their ears. And we would put flags. We'd have 6-foot flags all around on the fields, so we would know where we set our traps. Then in the wintertime, we would go, Dad would help us, and we would set traps. We had a creek on our farm, and then we went over to the Baki farm, and we set traps. So then Dad would go with us on Sunday. We might ski across the hills and so forth, and check our traps. And that was for mink, muskrat. I guess that was it, mink and muskrat. We caught some. I remember having these little silver fish we put on the trap. Then I remember in the woods, we set traps for skunks But I remember if we had a live tent, we'd have to go and get somebody to help us. Anyway, of course, that's kind of off the point when we were talking about conveniences. But today, of course, with electricity, we had many kitchen conveniences that we had none. Our irons were on the range. We did all our ironing that way. And of course, we carried water into our homes. And today, we have running water. Of course, that eventually took place anyway. But another thing that I remember is butchering. They called them butchering rings. And the families would, I think they usually had 12 in the ring, or maybe more. I'm not sure about that. But John Bisty did the butchering in our area, and then each one would furnish a beef. But of course, you see, they canned the beef then. And of course, each person got so much off of that beef then. But pork, they butchered their own, and they canned that. I don't know what else you would like to know about. As far as school goes, we were talking about Red Oak School. I felt that we had very good training, and of course, we took exams when we were in 8th grade, and we took exams in every course, and if we didn't pass them, we couldn't enter high school. I've heard people make the remark here in Decorah, well, I don't know how you ever made it through high school or through college. And I said, well, there were many cum laudes and magna cum laudes that came out of the country schools. And of course, when I finished high school here, I attended Luther for 2 years. Then I went into Chicago into nursing. And I was in there 3 years, and then I took extra classes after that in public health. I met my first husband there while he was in law school. He was going to Northwestern Law School. And we were married in 1941, and we came out here and were married at Washington Prairie. And Bill's father was a congregational pastor. And so my father wanted to know if he could have some part of the service. And Reverend Korn said, certainly, if he's a pastor, I feel he should have the whole service. I will sit on the front pew. It happened to be Reverend Korn's last year there. But he was always very jovial and considerate of various family activities and the people. Now, I do remember, I think it was the 75th anniversary of Washington Prairie Church, but I was very young at that time, but I remember their tents being set up near the parsonage, but up toward the church, and that was a big affair. Now, I don't know, did Charlotte ever speak to that?
No.
But I just barely remember it, but it was a potluck, and it must have been the 75th, because I recall the 100th, you know. So it must have been, because I remember I was very small. Then another thing I can remember was the old pump organ, of course, at the church, that they'd have to hire somebody to stand there and pump it, you know, while they were playing it. And now my mother said that she played that organ for 2 years, and Marie Korn was ill. But Marie Korn played most of the time, of course, when I was growing up. We do have a couple of pieces from the Korn family that Henrietta Korn gave Mother one, and I think the other one Marie gave Mother. One is a doily, a piece of doily, and the other is a piece of silver, which we, of course, think a lot of, knowing the family and everything. Now, I believe that's about all I remember. Is there any questions that you would like to ask about it?
Well, that's very interesting. You covered a lot of
Yeah, and my childhood and so forth.
You mentioned a couple things I was going to ask you. You mentioned your dad had a cream route down in Northern.
Oh, I didn't tell about Dad and the cream route. Yeah, my father had a cream route, and it was to Nordness, and he would go into Nordness 2 or 3 times a week. I think in the wintertime it was twice. I believe in the summertime they went 3 times. And of course, he used to shop at the store, and of course the Nelson family lived there, and they ran the store, and there were 8 girls and 1 boy in that family. And Dad always enjoyed visiting with them too. And I remember Florence Lynch mentioning that she recalled my father coming in because he always told a lot of jokes. But see, in the wintertime, when they were hauling cream with horses, and the roads would be full of snow, they would cut fences. And of course, I don't imagine some of the farmers appreciated that, but of course they wanted their cream to get to the creamery too. So then another thing I can remember is my father died just a year after we were married, and we had to come out here and go out on the farm for a couple of years so we could get Mother settled. And we couldn't get anyone on the farm because it was during the war. And I learned to drive a car at that time, and I remember knocking the mailbox down and driving up to Visty's and Will Winneball and Mrs. Visty were visiting, and they said, Aunt, you got a flat tire. And of course at that time you had inner tubes, and you couldn't get tires either. It was very difficult. And they put that tire tube, they put patches on, I remember, 30, I guess, something like that. And then they put it in the paper, and my husband's name was by it, and he didn't appreciate it because he did not do it, of course. It was my error. And then I remember he was teaching me how to drive a tractor. And we lived next to Will Winneball's and John Visty's. And there was, above Linneball's, there was, the embankment was very high, and the road came down. And we were using lights for driving at night, and Bill was teaching me how to drive this tractor. And I came to near the end of the road, and I yelled, ho. And then Will Linneball was real concerned. He said he heard me, and he was afraid I was coming over the embankment. But then he heard us laughing. So then another time with the tractor, I was taking care of a cousin who was only 22, 23 years old at the time. She had a brain tumor. I was real concerned about her, and I stayed with her nights. But I was also out on the tractor the next day, and I was relieving my husband, and I went right through the borderline fence between Sloan's, between Ernest and ours. And I remember my husband came back out after he'd eaten lunch, and I told him I had a little problem, and of course all he could think of was something happened to the tractor because we had a lot of moisture that spring and they couldn't get into the field. But I told him that I'd gone through the borderline fence. He didn't see how anyone could do that, but I did. I said I drove right through and turned around and came back. But they had to fix the fence. Anyway, I recall that. And then I didn't tell about 4-H Club. I thought, and about parochial school. Now, we had Marie Hick for parochial school, and I hope she gets a lot of credit for the good job that she did. She was marvelous. They would close our country schools for 2 weeks during the school year, and Marie would come in and teach us. And I still can see some of her diagrams and things that she used teaching us parochial school. It was marvelous. And then in the summertime, we'd go 2 weeks. Now, we also had Sunday school all summer long. We didn't have Sunday school through the school year because of weather conditions and so forth. But I forgot that because I really think that she was wonderful. Now, I don't know I believe they had teachers after that. I don't know. But Mother had a Hagen, and his daughter still lives in Presco, and I plan to go up to see her, but I haven't accomplished that as yet. But I have failed to mention that, but I do feel that she was marvelous. Now, is there anything else?
You mentioned 4-H. You were quite active.
Oh, 4-H. Okay, now, I was active in 4-H Club for many years, And Clara Baki was our leader for a number of years, and then Selma Olson took over, and she too was good. But we learned many, many things. We learned picture appreciation. We learned music. Besides, we had various projects each year. One year we had tanning, we had sewing, we had furnishing our rooms, we had baking, we had refinishing furniture, and then we had demonstration teams. Of course, some were in tanning, some were in bread baking or whatever. I remember being in one on making pillows and also one of tanning. And then if we were selected as winners from the county, of course, we went to Ames or Waterloo, and I remember being in both places. I don't know exactly what they do today with 4-H, whether they do that or not, do they?
Yes, they do.
That's very, I feel that we got a lot of 4-H.
A couple stories you mentioned the other day when we were visiting. You talked about how you and your sister would go to your grandpa when he dynamited stumps.
My grandmother was
Your
what?
grandfather when he dynamited stumps. You remember that story you were telling us? That was kind of interesting. Over by the parsonage, your grandfather dynamited stumps. You remember that story at all?
You mean grandmother Stone or Baki?
I'm not sure which one it was.
I don't remember it now. What was that? But I've forgotten my grandmother Baki. Of course, she raised 9 children by herself, actually, because Oli was born after her husband died. And she would hire help because she wanted her children all to get schooling, and so all the boys went to Luther, of course, for their well, what do they call it? Prep school, but it was high school. All but Oli, and Oli went to high school. They had high school here. And the girls, a couple of the girls went to high school here too. Ruth Hansen and Lillian. And, but the others, and Isabel and Clara went to Breckenridge. And then Aunt Clara went on to Cedar Falls for teaching. My dad and all his brothers were at Luther for prep. And then Oli graduated from Luther, but 3 of them went on to Ames. And my dad graduated from Ames, and I don't recall if the other boys did or not. I'm sure they probably did, but I forgot. The stories, as they tell me about them.
Now, you knew the Jacobsons quite well.
Yes, we were very good friends with the Jacobsons because Constance was in my class, of course, in school. And of course, they were very intelligent. We used to kid Connie about it because she was the only one in her class, and she was supposedly a year behind us, but of course they promoted her to our class, and I remember it was Rudolph Odie and Arthur Brunhagen and Constance Jacobson and myself in our class. And I remember staying at Jacobson's, and I can remember them having 2 sides to that house. You went upstairs on one side and you couldn't get through to the other side. You had to come down and go through the kitchen up on the other side. And I can remember we stayed on the side above the living room when we stayed there. That I recall. And of course I remember the Jacobsons, both Mr. and Mrs. Jacobson. But of course we used to stay at homes like that when we were going to country school. I recall once when we went over to Odie's, the whole school went. And it was in the wintertime, so they came by sleigh. And I remember Rudolph and I, and some of them, we could stay on the sleigh, but they couldn't all. Some of them had to walk. But we were smaller at the time. But we used to stay overnight quite often at different places. Of course, the Weslems were cousins of ours, being their mother was a Solon. And we spent quite a bit of time with them, with Bernice and Wilma and Marie. And of course, Wilma is Mrs. Ray Paco, and they live here in Decorn. Bernice lives in Minneapolis. And of course, Marie has passed away, but her children live here. Mm-hmm. And we used to spend quite a bit of time in town here, too, with Gilbert Solon. because my great aunt, she spoke only Norwegian, but she could understand English, but she was from Norway, and she would always answer everything in Norwegian. And we used to laugh because Uncle Gilbert would, of course, he'd retired from the farm at that time, and so he'd always laugh and joke, and he would say, oh, he put his teeth in his pocket, and then he's through eating, he'd put them back in his mouth. He'd tell us about it, and he'd laugh about it all the time. Then I remember he was telling us about when he learned to drive the car, how he drove it out there on the farm, and he'd run into the straw stack. That was Uncle Gilbert. That wasn't my grandfather. My grandfather, he never drove the car. In fact, my aunt and dad drove the car, and I remember it was a Beeley, and we sat in the jump seats, my sister and I, and they would drive this car. And of course, in the wintertime, it was set up, all of the tires. Why? I don't know. Probably the tires weren't that good at that time. I don't know the reason for that. But he had one of the first tractors in the area. My grandfather did. And I remember, another thing I remember about was going and planting potatoes with him. He had a potato planter, and we'd sit on the cart, and he'd tell us we'd have to drop our potatoes, and he was driving it. But he'd have the team and this cart, and then we'd sit on the cart and drop the potatoes. I remember that. Then I remember as he got older and was grubbing wood up in the woods, and he had the woods it looked like a park, and we would go with him, and then when he was going to dynamite a stump, he'd put the dynamite underneath, and then he'd have us run, and we'd have to run for the trees, and then when he lit the match, he'd run for the closest tree. We'd have to stand behind it, and then it would all blow up. But he cleaned out all the stuff. It would be kind of fun to see that area today. I don't know what it looks like anymore, but
You got together with the Higgs quite a bit too, didn't you?
we stayed at John Higgs Jr. Of course, John was, his mother was a Baki. But we did not stay at Adolf Higgs. Of course, they were my mother's age, all of them, you know. But we stayed at John Olaf's place because Ruth, his sister, was our age. And of course, we used to stay over at the Baki's in the summertime. That was a privilege to go over there to stay for a week. And then I can remember staying over in El Dorado with the Evensons. And Mrs. Evenson was a Odie. And she was a very good friend of my mother's. And my sister and I would go over there and stay in El Dorado. And we did that a couple of summers, probably for a week or so. You know, we spent that time. So it was kind of a coincidence. Our living in Hinsdale, a lady had a garage sale. She was selling many things from her own mother's home, who was in her 90s, and she'd gone into a rest home. Actually, it wasn't an infirmary or anything. So she was selling various things. And it was the year my second daughter was being married. So we went over, and Nancy picked up several things. She got a dresser and chest of drawers that matched. And what else did we, we got a desk that I refinished. So we got a kitchen table. And I remember paying $1 for this kitchen table. And I think Nancy paid something like $10 or $20 for the dresser and chest of drawers, but she decided she didn't want the bedstead. She was sorry about that later. But then she picked up some chairs, and so this lady said, you know, I'd like to see some of these things when you have them refinished. So we refinished them in my garage. So she could furnish her own apartment when they were married. In fact, everything in her apartment, with the exception of the box spring and mattress, were things things she picked up at garage sale and refinished. And so anyway, this lady came over we called her then and told her to come over, and she came over. And so I had the desk in my den, and I had a picture of Washington Prairie Church above my desk in there. And she said, "Where is that?" She said, "It looks familiar." I said, "That's Washington Prairie Church. I'm sure you've never heard of it." "Oh, yes," she said, "I've been there." She said, we used to come out to El Dorado. We had a cottage there. My dad had a cottage there. And I can remember it was on stilts, and we thought that was something. And I can remember they had kind of a dugout where they kept their milk and their butter and that sort of thing, you know. And so actually, as a child, when we visited Evanston in El Dorado, we played with this woman. And so that was really a coincidence. And I remember Wilma Evanston lived in Chicago at the time, so I called her on the phone. And she said that sure is a coincidence, but she said she had been in contact with her. But we did a lot of refinishing of furniture anyway, buying old things and refinishing them. We started out that way ourselves, and well, my daughter did especially, but my older daughter didn't, because she had some too. And they all had some pieces from the Solon home. We have, Eloise has one piece from the Bossy family, but I have a secretary, a butternut desk, and a washstand, and I had a bed that went with it, but in moving, that bed was not used, and somehow it became lost, and we don't remember just what happened. We did have a few problems with movers once, and whether, it stayed with those movers, we're not sure. And of course, I have the furniture from the old parlor, but my daughter in Cleveland has part of that, because we did not have room for it here in our home in Decorah. And she has the piano that my mother started out with, which was a crown piano, it's solid oak, and it has 4 pedals. And but Mother thought that it was her piano, but at the time she was married, her dad decided he didn't want her to take it up to her home, so he bought her another piano that Mother said it was never as good. But anyway, then we refinished this piano when we lived in Chatham, Illinois. But that my children, we took lessons on it. My children took lessons on it, and my oldest daughter's children took lessons on this piano. But this 4th pedal is a violin effect. But we are able to get the leather pieces that go into this panel, that you slip into this piano. And but someone said, surely somebody must know from the Crown Piano Company, but we've never been able to anyway. And everyone that's tuned it, they've always made that remark, if they could only get these pieces, But I remember Mother playing it with that violin effect, it was beautiful. But of course, by the time we came along, they were just, all the leather pieces just didn't work very good now, it did.
Now, who was your piano teacher when you were growing up?
Oh, we had Bertha Haig and Mrs. Hobeck here with our 2 piano teachers. And of course, Mother taught us some too, because Mother was very good at piano. And Mother was a very good seamstress. In fact, I always thought my mother was quite talented. She was a very good seamstress. She was very active in organization. She was very good in music and good in craft. There were really very few things my mother couldn't do. I wish I could do as much. But that's, each family is a little different. I think I noticed that with my own children. They all have, a different talent. And I guess that's to be expected.
What are your memories of Paul Corrin? You said he used to come.
Well, I remember Paul Corrin real well, because we used to visit a lot, and of course, I still can remember him telling me to straighten up. Of course, I was tall. Stand like your mother. Every time I see Reverend Thorne, he'd say, Dad like your mother. And of course, he used to visit. He used to come around and visit us from the time we were children, at least once a year. I'm sure that, we would visit with Reverend Thorne. And then, of course, if anyone was ill, he always made a visit. And, of course, she always got out her wine when Reverend Thorne came. Of course, they served little wine glasses. And Mother made dandelion wine and elderberry blossom wine. And I remember these 10-gallon pots on the floor down in the basement. And they'd have all these blossoms, and then they'd have all the fruit on it. Raisins and lemons and oranges and grapefruit. And then she'd weight them down with a big plate and a stone. See, and then it would ferment for so long, I guess, and so forth. In fact, I can remember as children we had to my sister and I'd sit out on the lawn and pick dandelions, till we were blue in the face, so that she'd had enough dandelions for wine. But I was going to try to make dandelion once, and I lived in Hinsdale, and I had my patients picking dandelions for me on the grounds. I worked in the TV stand. And so they said we'd gotten a recipe. One of the patients said, actually, I said, I wish I had mothers, but I haven't any idea what happened to it. She said, I think I've seen one, and so she said, I'll have my family check it, and so she did. So I tried this recipe, and I had all this fruit and sugar, and everything. Oh, it tasted terrible. It was so bitter. Then my daughter came home, and she'd been living in Brazil. And I came home from work one day, and there was a little flask of wine, and it said dandelion wine on it, and 2 wine glasses, So, I don't know, when she came home, I said, what's this? Well, she said, Mother, I bought this wine for 29 cents. And she said, I think it'd be cheaper for you to buy your wine. It was really bitter. It was awful.
Was there any other stories you'd like to add, or any other
No, I
memories?
can't think of any at this time. Oh, I can tell you the one about Ted Swanson. You know who he is? That's Will Wannewall's brother-in-law, Willard's sister's husband. And Ruth is dead, has been dead for many years. But my first husband and I were out on the farm, and he'd never been on a farm before, and we were going to fix the fence down along the road. And I was going to help him, and neither of us knew much about repairing fences. But anyway, we were down there working, and I remember having shorts on and just a halter, and it was, in the summertime it was hot. And Bill had just trousers on. I remember Ted Swanson stopping as he went along, and he says, hello, Adam and Eve. But you never knew what Ted would say anyway. You never knew what to expect. Mm-hmm. So, but of course, we helped a lot on the farm, so having no brothers.
One thing we had talked about, when they didn't have a parish hall, a lot of the wedding receptions were held at home. Now, was your wedding reception held at home when you were married?
No, my wedding reception was at home. We had no parish house at that time. So we had, we had tables out in the yard. It was very fortunate, I guess, that it didn't rain or anything, as I think of it. And we had an evening meal, and, well, that was it, I guess. I can remember we didn't own a car, and one of my husband's attendants had loaned his car to us, and I remember we went to Fresco and back the next day because the congregation was to have a shower on us that day, the day after the wedding. And I remember they told us we just left in time the night before because Washington Prairie was noted for chivalry. Mm-hmm. And I guess the old church still stood over across from Eggy's at that time, you see. and they said that they were lined up there ready to come over. And it was a good thing because Bill's father was there, and he was very much against beer or wine or anything else, because I remember my dad served wine, and they rather upset him. And I remember we wouldn't have had money at the time anyway to have bought beer for him. I remember that. But then we came back, of course, the next day, and then they had the shower. But they do that. Do they still do that out in Washington Prairie?
They wait a couple weeks now, though, after you're
Do they
married.
still have Chevrolet too? No, see, well, we were fortunate. We missed it.
You mentioned, too, we talked earlier about Charlotte Haig's wedding.
Yeah, I recall Charlotte's wedding because I can remember we were table waiters. I was a sophomore in high school, and we were table waiters for the junior senior prom, I guess. And I can still remember this organdy dress my mother made me. And it was gorgeous. My clothes were beautiful. Mother made over many things, but they were always look nice. And but I didn't wait table. I was a guest at that wedding, of course. But I don't remember the weather or anything like that. But I do remember the church, how it decorated and so forth. In fact, I have some pictures around here of how the church was decorated for my aunt's wedding, my dad's sister's wedding. But we didn't take pictures of the church at the time we were married. I don't know whether they had candelabras for the church now or not. I think my Uncle Sig made some, and we used those at the time we were married.
I have a current picture of your family that we didn't show. Maybe we can hold that up. This is your...
Okay, this is a picture of my family. It was taken 3 years ago on my 70th birthday. And, of course, this is with my second husband, Wesley Webb. But my children are as follows. I have 2 girls and a boy. And Nancy's husband passed away in 1984. So Nancy is on here with her 2 girls at that time. And above her is my son and his wife. Then over to the right is my older daughter and her 2 children. And then, of course, it's Wesley and myself.
That's a nice picture.
Yeah, I think Erickson does a very good job. We were very happy with him. We had somebody else from Wes's family when they were here, and we're not. Of course, it's a bigger family too, and it's a little bit harder to take pictures, I think.
Well, is there anything else you can think of?
Nothing I can think of at this time.
Well, this has
I
been
probably
very
will think of it
interesting.
tomorrow.
Yeah, this has been very nice talking with you.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed doing it.
This is Elaine Haig, and we've been conducting an interview with Antoinette Good Webb in connection with an oral history project at Washington Prairie. Good morning. I'm Elaine Haig at the home of Edith Gibb, 106 Ohio Street in Decorah. Today, July 17, 1990, we will be discussing Edith's memories, especially as they relate to Washington Prairie.